Judge, thank you so much for doing this, coming all the way from Albany to be with us.
Glad to be here. It's a pleasant drive this morning.
All right. Well, I'm welcoming you. I'm welcoming CJ, your clerk here, and we appreciate you both coming. I want to start at the beginning. You grew up near here in Jones County. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your upbringing and your formative years. And tell us what effect that may have had on you, you know, as a man, as a lawyer, as a judge. What about your upbringing informs who you are today?
Well, I was born in interesting times, as you might say. Grew up in Jones County, very near here. And I've kind of jokingly and seriously referred to that as God's country. And some people said because nobody else would love it. But it was a strictly rural area. At that time, it was full of peach orchards and pimento pepper crops and that sort of thing. So most people were farmers, and it was very rural. There was just a little bit of industrial activity. So that the agrarian society, that's where we grew up. It also was during the time of segregation. I think by living in a rural area, that was not quite as intensive as it may have been if I had been in an urban area. It was a time of a very close community. It really was a village sort of sense. Everybody had the ability to discipline you, whether they were related to you or not. That sort of thing. I was raised in a single parent home, but there were other male figures who were relatives. I had an uncle, a bigger, two older cousins. They were more my brothers than my first cousins. Of course, church was a big deal. Everyone went to church. It was always interesting because we had a Baptist church, a Methodist church where I was going. And we also, the next time, had a Pentecostal church. And everybody, you know, went to everyone else's church, and the idea of that being a distinction was not one. Now, being raised in a religious circumstance, of course, and I was in the AME church, which very much emphasized education. It was an organized church, Episcopalian in style. So I got a chance to get involved in a lot of church events and things. That was a summer program referred to as the Sunday School Convention, where you went around and you met people from other areas of the state. So I was able to have some contact with folks who were not in the rural area, from the larger towns, from Little Georgia and from around the area. And of course, gave me some opportunity to interact, to display my talents, the few that I thought I had. And but it also was a time when everyone agreed that education was central, most important. And my mother certainly was one of those persons that just did not abide while not getting one's lesson. So in that environment, I think I learned the habits and the values that I think have come to me thus far.
Well, you speak of education. Of course, you're a double bear.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how it came to be that you went to Mercer University first as an undergraduate, then as a law student.
Well, yeah, if I tell the story, if anyone's heard this before, I apologize. I spoke to the undergraduate graduating class this past spring, and I shared with them the story. The old Mercer campus, of course, the main campus, which is a few blocks from here, was the campus I was first familiar with. And the first time I remember seeing Mercer was, I guess I was maybe 5 or 6, 7 years old. And at that time, the College Street went all the way through Mercer's campus. And I remember seeing this building that I described as having all these steeples. I did not understand what spires were, of course. So I asked my mom, I said, what is that building for all those, you know, what church is that? That's what I asked her. And she said, that's not a church. That's Mercer University. That's where kids go to college. And she reminded me years later that I had said, that, well, I'm going to Mercer. Of course, this is the 1950s. There were no black kids at Mercer. There would not be any for quite a while. And what I credited my mother with is that she did not challenge me. She didn't say, no, you can't. you shouldn't. So, and she reminded me years later, as I said earlier, this was during the days of segregation, segregated schools. I think our county, Jones County schools, I think began what they call voluntary transfer in my senior year in high school. And I was not one of the transferees, I stayed where I was. And but at the same time, Mercer had instituted this new policy that was open to integration, and they began to recruit who they felt were prepared and capable black students. And I was one of those. So I got a scholarship to come to Mercer. And when my mother brought me there that fall, and she said, you said you were going to Mercer, didn't you? she had never forgotten that. So that's what happened. I had applied to other schools, Georgia and other places, but Mercer, I was familiar with it, and they offered some wherewithal to go.
That always helps.
So that's how I got to Mercer. Yeah.
What was it like to be an undergraduate at Mercer?
Well, it was interesting. Again, you have to understand the environment. This is in the 60s, the late 60s. I started Mercer in 1967. I know all you would think that is really ancient times. but that's when it was. It was like right after the civil rights movement was at its height, so to speak, and so people were very much conscious of their identities, black and proud, and that sort of thing. And of course, there was a certain amount of what I consider positiveness in going on in society, and as well as, of course, this is Vietnam War. It's really cranking up at the time. But I found the experience a very good one, because Mercer was a small school as it is now, and because it was such the small classes and the ability to interact with your classmates and other, as well as the professors and all, was a good thing. So to me, it was like, come to town. Here's my chance to make it. I've said to my clerks, another thing that happened during the 60s around that time was a lot of people were engaged in what they referred to as finding themselves. I have to find myself. If you go back and look at some of the movies that were made around the late 60s and early 70s, this business of finding one's true self, and that was very, very popular. But growing up poor, I said I was never lost. I knew what I needed to be. I needed to be out of Mercer 4 years, and that's what I did.
Let's talk for just a minute about law school. I mentioned to the class that you remember the class of '74.
Yes.
That's a matter of great pride to everybody that's a member of that class. Could you talk a little bit about your law school experience and what Mercer did well, maybe what they didn't do well? Anybody in particular you remember, any particular memories of law school?
Well, I look at this large class here this morning, and I look at this beautiful building on this hill. We were in the Ryers Law Building, and I see, I don't think I see a tie in here other than yours and mine. In those years, the law school was on the main campus, and you knew the law students were, because at that time, except for maybe one or two exceptions, they were all white males and they all wore white shirts and ties and suits, because that's the way law students dressed. So you came to class dressed as lawyers were expected to dress in court. Everything was very formal, in terms of standing and briefing cases. The roll was called aloud, of course, and we believed that was a conspiracy, that if you were called in one class that day, you were likely to be called in another class later that day. We thought that was a conspiracy among professors. Professor Rayberg, who died some years back, he was one of our professors. I think he went back decades even then, so everybody knew who we called him the Stingray. But he became very close to our class. the makeup of my class, I think we started out, I was always the only black in my class. I think there were 3 or 4 women in the beginning, but in the end, after the first year, there was only one. That was Ruth West Garrett, was the other person, and she and I always described ourselves as the minority. We control the minority. We had 1 white female and 1 black female. But our class was kind of it was close. I mean, we really, for whatever reason, got along. And some things I remember, I guess I'm trying to say about my experience, and some things that some of you may not be aware of. I think there used to be at least a publication in the school that referred to as the Legal Eagle, kind of a newspaper type of setup. Well, that began as a mimeograph of I guess defamatory smut sheets, so to speak.
Rag is the word you're looking for.
That's what I'm looking for. I mean, it was just a way to spread rumors and say things and make up stuff about people.
They have Facebook for that.
That's the heritage of that probably very distinguished publication now. Another thing that we engaged in doing was, of course, when we were seniors, there had been for years what was called the barrister's ball, which was very formal. Everybody has to dress up, nice and that sort of thing. And that never quite seemed to be fulfilling to us. So we started another kind of a parallel part of that was called the barrister's brawl. I don't know how much of that goes on now, but we began that thing too. So I think we were very serious, I think, about the work. We had, as far as being in class, but we had a good time at the end of the week. One guy worked part-time with the wrestling industry, so we could go to wrestling matches down at the Coliseum. There was an ice hockey team at the time, and we could go to Friday night hockey. There was a pizzeria on Riverside Drive that sold all the pizza you could eat and chicken wing parts. And it sold them, I think it's like $1.65 or $2 something. So we would gang up and go to lunch. There, of course, there's devastate that group.
Not in business anymore.
Not in business anymore. We had classmates that sued one of the downtown department stores who had all the fried clams you could eat. Mm-hmm. And of course, they didn't have enough for them to eat. So they sued. Fortunately for them, we graduated, and the case went away. They didn't remain in town to prosecute that case, but it would have been wild. We had a great time, and I think because we did, and it was a much smaller group, as I say, than is here, and we became close. And the way we established this class of '74 scholarship, everybody was proud of the Syrian. We thought we had a great education, and we were part of a real rich family. And as a result, we set that scholarship up. And we had a reunion. Our class had a reunion every year for 10 years. Starting the first year after we graduated, and we later put it into the 5-year cycle. So that's what we got together every year. And so it was, I liked it. I don't miss law school in the sense of being abused by professors and scared to death. But in terms of otherwise, I think it was enjoyable. It was an interesting experience.
I want to ask you about a time period in your career between the time you graduated and when you first became a judge. And you had a number of different kinds of jobs. I mean, you were a state prosecutor, you were a federal prosecutor, you were in private practice. Which did you like the best? Which did you like the least, and why?
Boy, that's a difficult one, because I think each one in its own way was something that I enjoyed. as far as being a prosecutor or a defense attorney, it's always been my position that a trial lawyer is a trial lawyer is a trial lawyer. Only the subject of the trial changes, and maybe the client is represented. The skill set is the same. So I saw those both sides of those things as being interesting. I think I would give a lot of weight to the relative fewer years that I spent as a private lawyer, because I think it gave me an appreciation for the business side of law, in a way that you don't get when you're working as a state prosecutor or even as a federal prosecutor. That someone who has an office and they've got to pay the help, so to speak. You got to pay yourself and you got to pay them. So you're a part of the business world in that sense, and being successful, as well as what's the routine part of it that you're already aware of as a lawyer representing the side of the case. So I think probably that's unique in a way that I give some weight to, because it gave me that perspective. When I became a judge, I think I had a sensitivity and an appreciation for that I probably would not have had necessarily if I only had been in the public representation.
During those years before you became a judge, were there times when you were treated differently because of your race?
Well, yeah, I think so. And that's the way I would answer that question is maybe not the way you would expect it. Was I ever treated openly in a racist way? Called names in the court? No, it wasn't that. I think it was the shock and of the whole idea. When I became a prosecutor here in Bibb County, there were very few. I think there maybe had been one or two African-American prosecutors in Atlanta, and maybe DeKalb County, I don't know, but otherwise no. And at that time, it may surprise some of you to know, women did not have to serve on the jury in Georgia. And Georgia had the liberal rule. There were some states that did not permit women, particularly women with children, to serve on juries. The Supreme Court ruled on it. Georgia's law was more permissive. It said women didn't have to serve if they didn't want to. And of course, when the Supreme Court issued its decision that the jurors had to be balanced and representative, of course, a lot of women were certainly on the jury. But before then, when I began, in Bibb County, they subpoenaed, say, 95 jurors. And you see about 85 white men, and the other 10 were a mixture of women and blacks, maybe. So for a young, skinny guy, and at the time I had been in the military for a while, so I had these horn rim glasses that I would put on, to try to look older. But I had my dark black suit that I would wear, really with a vest, trying to look serious. And to stand up, and the judge would say, call the next case, and I stand up, and I call the case and say, I'm really saying I represent the state of Georgia. And you see these faces like, what? This guy's the prosecutor. So so it's that kind of thing that was not a role that black was seen in. So I guess what I had to do was to gain the credibility. I had to prove the skill set. And I absolutely had a wonderful relationship with the judges many of whom I later served with on the bench in Superior Court. But so I wouldn't call it racist, but the idea of expecting that this is someone that's not really been in this place before in this role, can you really do it? And so I remember, I won't say which judge it was, but I work out pleas in some of my cases. And the judge sometimes almost just talked the defendant out of it, like, hey, who says you're going to get convicted, And is this a real good solution to work out this case? And of course, after I got a number of guilties from jury verdicts, then my recommendations and proposals were taken more seriously. So I think it was a growing thing. So in other words, I don't, perhaps naively, but I don't think that obviously there are people who are racist, no question about it, but I think most people don't spend their time deciding how can I be a racist and hate people and mistreat people based on that. I think it's more of a tendency sometimes not being sensitive to, not understanding, not perceiving another point of view, because that's not maybe an experience one has not had, I've been exposed to. So that was the way it was. So in other words, where blacks could be seen easily as defendants in the case, of course, and other roles in that courtroom, being the person who's in charge of presenting a case, no, that was something that had not occurred. The same as with working with police officers and sheriff's deputies, there was that need to establish credibility and respectability, because that's a role that had not happened. Judge Walker Johnson, who was had worked in the Justice Department during the Civil Rights time, and he was an assistant U.S. attorney here, and later was in the DA's office. We served together, and he later became the district attorney, and later Superior Court judge. We worked together over the years. He and I were very close. He was very much a mentor. And I had a case once where I was satisfied that the case had been charged taking race into account. There were two people who were not charged and one person who was charged. And the only difference I could see was the racial makeup of those persons. And I was quite concerned about it. And so I spoke to Judge Johnson, and he had a way of just really get to the heart of things. And I explained, I said, this appears to me it's just not fair. There seems to be a racial aspect of this that's not proper. And he really made it clear to me for the first time that I had some ability to correct what I understood to be a bad situation. And he also could use some very salty language, so I won't quote him exactly. He says, you understand, you see what the problem is? Then dismiss, and so and so. No. But it was like, again, which was one of the reasons why I had accepted the job in the DA's office in the first place. The late Tom Jackson, who was a very well-known African-American attorney in Macon, I think he had gotten his legal training in Massachusetts, had moved to Georgia, and he, as well as C.B. King, down in Albany, with a handful of black attorneys who handled a lot of the civil rights cases, the segregation cases over the years. And when I got out of law school, I was about to come out of law school, there were very few African-American minority lawyers, period, in North Georgia. So to have someone you can kind of talk to and hope to get some perspective or view from where you stand was not very much available. But he was one of those persons. And when I first learned that I might have a chance to be, in fact, the first African-American prosecutor in this circuit, I went to talk to him about it because, you were a young black lawyer, you were supposed to be defending people, helping get people out of jail, to save them from the system, so to speak. And but having worked in the DA's office as an intern and a clerk, of course, I saw that most of the victims were African American too, and there were a lot of things that were not being received the type of sensitivity and attention that I thought they should receive. And so in my own mind, I felt that was probably a worthwhile thing to do, but I still wasn't so settled, I guess, comfortable with the idea. So I talked to him, and I explained to him that I might have an opportunity. Do you think that's something worth doing? He said, of course there is. He says, do you understand how long it's taken to get police officers, black officers on the police force, and the sheriff's department, and other agencies? And he says, when cases are charged, who do you think decides what gets prosecuted, what doesn't get prosecuted, and who gets what? So it's just the prosecutor. He says, sure, that's a job you should take. And so that's kind of all I needed. That was the confirmation I needed, and therefore went forward.
I'm going to ask you briefly about your time as Superior Court judge, and I want to turn to your career on the federal bench. But there came a time when you had this opportunity to become a Superior Court judge. Superior Court judges in Georgia have a wide variety of cases on their docket. How did that opportunity come about, and what did you like about being a Superior Court judge, and what maybe was less fun?
Well, the opportunities came about, strangely enough, the position I have now and the Superior Court position became open almost the same time. And I was involved in both, tried to get both, and ultimately did not get the federal position, but got the state position. I, over the years, and observing what judges do, what lawyers do, I felt that I had some skill set or temperament and way of doing things that I thought would be what I think judges ought to be able to do and how they should handle cases. And I thought that was an opportunity. If I had it, I would kind of go for it. So it turned out that the Superior Court judge position came up first. So I got that appointment. Now, what you love about Superior Court is, and Judge Lawson, I often laugh about that because Judge Lawson, of course, was a long time Superior Court judge also. And that's the court of general jurisdiction, as I tell my jurors now, which means basically anything that anyone wants to file can be filed in the Superior Court, and the Superior Court has the authority to handle it. On the other hand, the federal court, that's the court of limited jurisdiction, of course, it's not quite so broad. So that broad jurisdiction and all kinds of things was always interesting to me as a Superior Court judge. But the other thing was this almost uncontrollable beast in terms of number of cases. I tell my clerks, I said, if you want to see what an arraignment looks like, go over to Superior Court and watch them bring 200 or 300 people in and go through a long calendar call. You never see anything like that in federal court. And it's trying to manage that large calendar or docket of cases of virtually every kind that you can think of. The one thing that I liked that I don't do now, and it's related to domestic stuff, which is really bad, I guess, in a way, but it was adoptions. A strange little procedure that you did every now and then, because that was the only procedure that I could remember, that I could ever think of, where either one or both or every party is angry with whatever the judge does. You know, some people say, if you want to do the right thing, you know, both sides should be mad. I don't know whether that's true or not, but adoption was where everybody was happy. You know, you got a situation where a child is being adopted and you get the parents, and you know, that's great. And the parents were able to, for the first time, they are able to have a child of their own. So it's a proceeding that the court can engage in and authorize and condone legally. That's a perfectly great outcome. So
those are happy days.
Those are happy days. But otherwise, you know, it was facts in the hallway. Friday was the worst day. When you were what we call a chambers judge, and that's when everything that's non-trial, so all of the motions and that sort of thing. And Friday morning you would start at 8:30. This morning, 8:30. If they're still doing the same thing, they would have had URISA cases. That's the out-of-state uniform child support cases that come from other states. Do those 8:30 to 9. 9 o'clock they have the calendar call for the civil docket for temporary hearings. And once you call the calendar and now it's ready, you call a recess, and then people go to negotiate, work out agreements, come back in, you take the agreements, and after that, for the rest of the day, you hear the people who were not able to agree. You know, so you have a couple that would have a total income of $3,000 a month. And then they each prepare an affidavit showing that each of them needed $3,000 a month. So,
Well, you'll be glad to know they still do that.
that I do not miss about my Superior Court. My hat's off to Superior Court.
It's called Friday Fights. Maybe they call it. Well, of course, the students understand about general jurisdiction judges and state judges, and they understand about federal judges because they've taken civil procedure. And so the time comes when, or I guess the second time comes when you are in the running to be a federal judge. And eventually were appointed and confirmed by the Senate. Could you describe that process? What was it like to be vetted, to be a United States district judge and then have the Senate vote?
That is an humbling process. It really is. And if you probably talk to anybody who's gone through that process successfully, that's the thing they tell you first. The first thing you got to understand is that where I've described it as this: all of your stars have to line up at exactly the same time. Period. If anything's out of order, it cannot happen. If it's there are people who've been who have made great judges, but the president elected was not the one that would be the one that they would get appointed by. Or the makeup of the Senate at a given time, all sorts of things could affect it. And so we realize how awfully fortunate you are to even be considered. So you go through this process, of course, and you got all this paper to fill out. I mean, that's unreal. You got a set you got to do for the vetting process. Like at that time, that was a committee that Senator Nunn established, and you got to get to that group. And if you get through that group as a person who is in the final group, then the senator would interview you. And I had an interview down in Runner Roberts with Senator Nunn, because I made the cut, so to speak. And that was a long interview and interesting process. And he and I talked about things like some of the things I shared this morning with the group, that my background, from my humble beginnings to be in a position to be considered my life as a federal judge is just it's unreal when you think about it. I mean, the odds of that is just somewhere out there in the stratosphere, and I was always aware of that. So once you finish that process, of course, and the senator makes his decision as to who to recommend to the president to be nominated, he recommended me. He called me at home one Saturday morning. I was living across the river here at Shirley Hills, and I was in the garage, and I heard the phone ring, and I answered the phone, and it was the senator. He says, "Hate to bother you on Saturday morning, Judge, but I wanted to call you." And I said, "Well, it's great that you called me at this time because you interrupted me and makes it clear to me I'm a much better judge than I am, a repairman, because I was trying to relight the heater for the water. I couldn't figure out how to relight the hot water heater." And of course, that's when he told me that he had decided that he would recommend me. Of course, he had not talked to others who were not being recommended, so he asked that I not share it. And so it was very easy for me to miss being around, not to be available to say who had gotten it before he announced it officially that next Monday, because I was in Jones County. Chief Justice Thompson, who was, of course, a Mercer graduate, he was on the Superior Court for that circuit, my home circuit, the old local circuit, I believe it is. And he had asked me, he says, "Liz, would you like sometime to come over and preside in your home county?" He said, "Sometimes, I can arrange that, sign the documents so you can fill in for me." And that Monday was the day. So I was in Jones County, in the courthouse that I had been to maybe once or twice as a kid, and sat in the balcony, I remember. And so here I am, presiding Superior Court in my home county. And no one could find me. They didn't know where I was. When they went down the list of people who didn't get it, so it became clearer that I must have been the one who must have gotten it. So I didn't have to break my promise to the senator not to reveal it, because I was over in Jones County. Of course, that's just get to the first two rounds. Then it's the White House. You got a person assigned to the White House counsel's office, and you got another ream of paper to fill out everything you could dream about. That'd be something interesting. And do these interviews, and they try to find out things that may be a problem. What you think about this and all. And so finally, after that happens, at some point, the president actually forwards the nomination.
This was President Clinton.
President Clinton. So my nomination gets forwarded. I got a call that I'll be getting the formal notice about it. I think something was happening in Asia. Some controversy was ongoing, and the president was in a meeting of the National Security Council. So I got a call from the counsel's office and said, the chief counsel's office said, the president would have called you himself, but this emergency is going on. I said, oh, that's fine, that's fine. And I was residing in a civil case in Superior Court, a jury trial involving an airplane crash, deaths in an airplane crash. And so I got this call, you've been nominated to send over to the Senate. And they told me that I would be receiving a fax. At that time in the Bibb County Courthouse, there was only one fax machine that was near the sheriff's office, over that courthouse. It was one of these old kind of thermofax type of machines. So this guy whose job was to watch this machine, I did not tell him what was happening. So he's looking at this machine, and here comes this letter. And it's at the top, it says, "The White House." It was the president's nomination. And he was like, "We got up the White House." So that happened. So when that goes to the Senate now, remember you've gone through all this process, everybody wants a ream of paper, wants to know everything about you. And by this time, the FBI has already done background on you too, and that's been taken care of. And it goes over, and ABA has done its thing. So then it goes to the Senate. And guess what? They have their own stack of questions that they want to ask, and we fill out a lot more paper. And so ultimately, we had a hearing. And I noticed Mrs. Reagan is, I think her funeral is today. And the reason I thought about that is President Nixon died the week of my hearing, just after the hearing. So the vote on us was put off for 2 weeks because everybody went to California to his funeral. But you go up for your hearing, and that's when it really hit. After all of these questions, after all of this investigation, and all of the things that go on as part of the process, went to the hearing room. You've seen them on C-SPAN in these beautiful rooms, and on the door outside of the conference room, it says, it had a list of the calendar of matters. It says, W. Lewis Sands of Georgia for United States District Judge. So, and I'm saying, this constitutional process that I've been reading about all my life, I said, this is really, so you realize that you're about to be questioned, by the Senate, so they can vote on you based on a recommendation from the President of the United States. I mean, it is an humbling experience to realize just what a rare opportunity that is to even have that opportunity to engage in such a thing. So one of my children asked me, why should I be a comedian? And I get around a lot. So Judge Darrell, Victoria Darrell, who's the state court judge in Albany now. She's a Mercer graduate also. She was my first clerk. She clerked for Judge Wilcox and I here at Superior Court. And there had been some hearings on television involving the Judiciary Committee at the time. And one of the people on the committee was Senator Strong Thurman of South Carolina. And I could do a pretty good Strong Thurman.
Feel free.
So Victoria says, it's going to be at your hearing, and so sure enough on the hearing day, and I'm the baby in the group. They have you hearing according to rank. The circuit court nominees, then district court nominees in the order of age. So I was the youngest of the 6 people who had a hearing that day. So I was last. But when we were all waiting, you know, so I look and along the wall I see this kind of orange, red plume there, and I realized, oh boy. I was asked one very embarrassing question that I think my supporters were more offended than I was. Judge Cooper for the Northern District said that really was a question for him and not for me. And but somehow the senator got confused, and he looked at me and he asked me, had I ever been arrested? Here I'm, sitting, before a Senate committee. Asked, have I ever been arrested? And I think Judge Cooper may have been arrested in some protests during the years of civil rights action. That's what he was getting at. So I said, fortunately, Senator, no, I haven't. So I'm going to embarrass my mother on the formal record. But after the hearing, he had pictures taken, and he grabbed me by the arm and he told me, he says, "You're going to make a fine judge." so it all worked out. So as I said, the hearing itself was, the vote was delayed for a couple of weeks because of the late president's funeral. And so I had been invited to go to the circuit conference, the 11th Circuit that was being held at Sawgrass down in Lewis, Jacksonville. And as a nominee, you could be invited to go to that. So I've been invited, so I was there. Everybody was saying, when are they going to vote? When are you going to be confirmed? So you get this question from everybody. My wife was going to join me later that day. And so I get a call from the counsel's office saying, you've just been confirmed by the Senate. Like, whoa. So after jumping up for a few minutes, then you ask about your friends. Did they get confirmed too? So yeah, everybody got confirmed. So you feel good about it. So here I come for the second time. I've got to keep this secret because we don't have cell phones at that time, right? And my wife's on her way there, and I don't want to tell anybody else until I tell her. And I couldn't tell her until she got there. So for a couple of hours, I had to keep this secret. One of the best pieces of news of my life until I could tell her first. But kind of in a squeezed down nutshell, that's kind of what the process was like for me. But it is absolutely an honor to be selected and recommended and to go to this, to go through that successfully, and to see actually the Constitution actually in play.
So over a couple of decades of being a federal judge, you've seen a lot of different kinds of things. What's given you the most satisfaction in that job?
Well, I think it's the thing that gives you the most satisfaction is probably the thing that's most challenging. I always speak well of my friends in the state bench because I've been a state judge and I know what the challenges are and judges who have to face election. And when you realize that a judge can make a decision that's absolutely correct, but is unpopular, and the judge in a system where that's true, and that sometimes their careers are ended, not because they've done anything wrong, but because what they did as a judge is unpopular in that sense. Federal judges, in the sense, because we have this life tenure, it means, and what I don't want to suggest either that there's an over concern by state judges about being elected. I think the great thing is that they do their jobs so well, notwithstanding that's the consequences they might face. As federal judges, we don't face that even as a possibility. So it's inexcusable to me, and an absolute requirement that federal judges make the best decisions they can make on the law as it is and be fair to everybody and not have to be concerned about things that judges in many circumstances would have to legitimately be concerned about. So you basically don't have an excuse for not doing your best.
Well, Judge, before I turn this over to the students, I always give our guests a chance to say anything you want to say, any advice you may have for these first-year students, maybe something you did hear or wished you had heard when you were in their shoes, but you got a free shot here.
Okay, well, I always enjoy these situations when there were people visiting who were actual lawyers and actual judges, because it would kind of confirm for me one way or the other what my decision. I hope all of you gave a lot of thought to why you will come to law school, and a serious consideration as to why you might want to become a lawyer. It's a wonderful, wonderful profession. It's a very difficult and demanding one, and it's one where we're committed to this idea of law. So that is primary. If one wants an illustrious and this glamorous career, I suggest there are many other more glamorous things that are not nearly so difficult as what you're facing in law school. And if one wants to make a lot of money, nothing wrong with that. If that's your primary reason, probably you'd be better off making a lot more money, a lot easier doing something else. We do something that, that no one else can do. And that is this. We have the privilege of representing the legal interests of other people. A person in this country can do two things. They can either represent themselves in court, pro se, or they have to acquire the assistance of a licensed attorney. And we hear about online law advice. You can get all the forms that you could possibly find to fill out lawsuits and those sorts of things. Google it and Wikipedia it. Believe it or not, I have a lawyer now that would actually cite Wikipedia in a briefing. I wouldn't suggest you do that. But what I'm getting at is this. We have this privilege that allows us to do something that others cannot do. And it requires us to do that at a very high level, at a very high commitment. That means more than having a glamorous job, more than making a lot of money. Because if people can get the same thing from their neighbor or from some online site as they could get from a practicing lawyer, why do you need to have a class of people who have that exclusive right? So what I'm saying is, with that privilege comes a great deal of responsibility that we all owe to society. And I hope everyone has thought about that and continue to remind yourself of that. And I think if that's the case, then we're going to be in good shape for lawyers. And only the secondary thing what I say to you is this: there's nothing more important than your integrity, that is, your integrity towards yourself first, towards your clients, also to other lawyers and the court. There's nothing more important than that. Everything hinges on that situation. So obviously you got the character to be in law school. You're going to have to prove that character to stand for the bar, and that will always be something that will go. As an old friend of mine used to say, a reputation does not follow you, it precedes you. And that's a more accurate word. So that's the second thing that I would indicate, that devotion to the law, married with the integrity that's required, as well as the preparation that you're getting here at this law school, should do well for you.
What questions do you all have for the judge this morning? Don't be shy.
Okay, please.
Mr. Stewart.
How did it turn out for the lawyer who said in Wikipedia?
Not good.
Yes, sir.
So when people are like applying to be clerks for you, I know that you probably get resumes from every walk of life of attorneys. What are like maybe one or two key things that like are really, really important to you for law school students that are applying to work for you?
But of course, first thing, of course, you want to work as hard as you can and do as well as you can to prepare yourself to do high quality work. I take the position that that a good student should be able to do the practical things that are necessary in a good change. That is to do sound research and good drafting skills. But there's more to it than that. A judge's chambers, particularly federal chambers, is very small, so you get the ability to work with others is very important. The idea of being a self-starter with a high status of your own to be applied in that environment is also important. I think experience is good to have. I think, if you got the opportunity to intern and do other things in areas, I think you should take advantage of it. I'm probably old school in the way that I don't think specialization is all that it's touted to be. I think any experience that's relevant in any kind of way is a good that it's going to come back, and particularly for those who like to practice in the courtroom or in trial work. Every experience you've had, in some way it's going to come back. It's going to give you a different perspective and a deeper understanding than maybe somebody who's not had that. So in terms of it's competitive. That's why I say you want to do as well as you can. So it stands out there. But we're looking for people who are able to work hard. In other words, you got to. It's not a 9 to 5. It might be some occasions, and I think CJ can vouch for this. It's kind of like it's however long it takes. So sometimes it takes long evenings and weekends, and other times it's not so demanding. We're very busy. One of my clerks left me and went to the Supreme Court of Florida at the clerk. And she called me. She said, says everybody wonders whether I stay after 5. Everybody left. But of course, a few weeks later, Bush versus Gore hit that chord. And I said, I know there's one clerk who knows what it's like to work those long hours on something that's really hot on the press. So great work habits and people skills and all sorts of things also are very important. Yes.
Judge, what's the hardest thing about being a judge? Whether it's the state court system or in the federal court?
The most difficult thing, I think, is it's a job that can be very isolating. And in a lot of ways, because you've got to always be concerned about what you say, how you say it, or where you say it, and that's why I always get CJ's with this morning. My Chambers family is so important because it's one of those few places you can just kind of settle down and not be concerned about that. So you're never quite you're removed. So it's the isolation. I think that's the toughest thing. And I think it's even tougher in state because in a way you're isolated in the same way, and for some good reasons. I mean, it's not for a bad reason. But at the same time, you've got to be involved because you need to, maintain your necessary political matters that you got to do to get reelected in the state in the good graces of the electorate. But that's probably the toughest thing is the isolation. And the other thing probably is. I hope that I'm wrong, but I think that the myth, I'm sure it's not true of most of lawyers, official lawyers, that the judge has a case to decide. So what happens is the plaintiff side brings this well-crafted, perfect, complete pleading and briefing, and the defense side brings this perfect pleading and briefing. So, Judge, all you got to do is just decide. And I won't ask my clerk to say anything about it, but there are many times when the brief is not very complete, not very well done at all. So we have to spend a lot of time looking for ourselves. So that could be kind of tough too, doing that part. And I guess it goes to the heart of being a judge. Whether there's good briefing, poor briefing, whether they're well laid out facts or not so well laid out facts, whether the science is clear or not, you got to decide it, Judge. And that's the reality that makes it so different. I would say to my applicants, if we were philosophers, we could talk and say, oh, what do you think about this particular view of life and the meaning of life? And we do like this and have a cup of coffee and we could talk. Oh man, this has been wonderful, wonderful. We gotta do this again sometime. And of course, if you're a scientist, you can just, you can just split that atom for 25 years, trying to find that special way to look at it and they're totally happy about it. But with the law and courts, society can't wait to get the answer to this problem. It's got to be resolved. And so for that reason, it's often resolved in a less than perfect way in terms of maybe an outcome, but in terms of a system that allows society to function, it is resolved.
Judge, I hope you can stay for a few minutes. I know some students will want to chat with you individually and shake your hand, but thank you for being with us.